Hi, everyone. This is Lauren Baker, founder of Search Engine Journal, and thanks for attending today's SEJ Think Tank. With us today, we have our partner ScribbleLive and Corin Schmid from ScribbleLive. Would you like to say hi, Corin?
Hello there.
Good. I'll let you get deeper into your background and expertise and everything else in a moment. First, I'll go ahead and do some basic housekeeping for everyone that's just jumping on right now or has not attended one of our webinars in the past. So just to let everyone know, the most popular question we get during the webinar itself is, will video and slides be made available? We put together a recap after all of our webinars on SEJ where we do feature the video of the webinar and slides as well. Also, over the course of the webinar, please make sure that you ask questions as they come up. We won't be stopping to answer the questions. However, after Corin's done with her presentation, we'll still have about 20 minutes left where we'll jump into a Q&A session and answer any questions that come up during the webinar and just anything that you may have in general about content repurposing. Speaking of questions and interactivity, we do have a poll that we'll be launching today. So we try to get most of you answering the polls. This one's really simple. When it launches, please go ahead and answer a question, and we'll be sure to address the results in the presentation itself. That's pretty much everything. For those of you that just jumped on, again, we're going to be making this presentation available afterwards in video and slide format, as well as a recap on the SEJ. We'll be sending out an email with all information about what you've learned today, and we'll be answering your questions in the Q&A session at the end. So, Corin, I'll hand things over to you.
Well, thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're dialing in from. As Lauren introduced me, I'm the Vice President of Marketing at ScribbleLive. And for those who are unfamiliar with ScribbleLive, we produce premium content at scale. So our customers use our software and solutions to increase demand generation, drive conversion, optimize funnel performance, among other things. And notably, use our visually on-demand talent network to repurpose existing content into premium content that drives these conversions and optimizes funnel performance. So moving on from this shameless plug, I'm really excited to talk to you today about how you can refresh your content and transform it into something that's much more engaging, what we would consider to be premium content, and that also extends beyond that top of funnel to support more mid and end of funnel initiatives. So with that, I'd like to start off with a stat. And in this case, the CMI, so the Content Marketing Institute, they just published their annual demand generation research report. And this year they found that 71% of marketers want to use their demand gen content to nurture leads further down the sales funnel. So in that mid to late stages. So this isn't really surprising because we know that marketing spends a lot of time and money and resources producing top of funnel, what we call tofu content to drive pipeline. And then there's the traditional notion of this handoff to sales that happens, and then sales runs with it, sort of middle of funnel, that conversion point, all the way to close. Now, the challenge with this, and again, it's more of a historic model because we know that buyers are increasingly expecting more of a self-service purchasing model, and that includes their information needs. So we've also seen a statistic of roughly over 70% of buyers, they're over 70% of the way into their purchase decision and their purchase cycle before they ever speak with a sales rep. And so this means that marketing is expected to look further downstream and how their top of funnel tofu content can be utilized mid to late funnel. And that inherently has issues of its own because the buyer needs are more sophisticated along the journey. And so something like a cool teaser message in some form of snackable micro content that you use on Instagram or LinkedIn simply isn't going to work mid-funnel. So the question now becomes, how can you create, or how can marketing continue to drive pipeline and produce net new content that nurtures leads throughout and further down into the middle and late stages of the sales cycle without the scope overwhelming your team, your budget, and your resources. So that's kind of frames up and keys up what I'm going to talk to you today about. And so effectively, I'll start off by talking a bit more about premium content and how it impacts your demand gen cycle. I'm going to talk about what is premium content, how are ways that you can repurpose existing content, and then I'm going to dive into a case study. It's our own case study of how we were able to literally we destroyed our targets in going to our largest program of the year using premium content, but actually repurposing nearly everything that we used at this conference. And so really then I want to get into how gathering data and gathering declared data to deliver more relevant experiences was really a key in producing not just repurposing content, but able to better support sales in that mid and late stage funnel. So first off, let's take a look at what makes premium content. And so we all know as marketers that content needs to be useful, it needs to resonate, it needs to be action driven. And when I talk about premium, I want to call this out because typically, and this was associated with a subscription or a paywall, or there is some sort of subscription that equaled content that was more in depth or specific than what was offered sort of in this freemium model. And whereas at Scribble and working with our clients is that premium has a whole new meaning. And so we look at 3 ways specifically that what we mean by premium content. And the first and foremost is visual and video. And what some additional stats here suggest is that, this isn't just a trend because 91% of buyers prefer visual content over traditional media, typically copy and text-based content assets such as a text-heavy white paper or product manual. And to that end, 95% of people will watch an explainer video to learn about a product or service before even engaging with a sales rep. So, in terms of a top of funnel asset, visual and video content needs to be snackable. It needs to be easy to share and digest and act on. But when it comes to further mid funnel, it needs to be a bit more informative. It needs to be more, have more relevant and meaningful information that is specific to the buyer persona. So that's the visual and video content. The next one that we're seeing really taking off is interactive, and it's considered interactive for the results it generates. So whether it's a solution finder, an assessment, or an ROI calculator, interactive content has been considered 300 times or 300% more effective and shown to convert 2 times more than static content. But more importantly, it collects zero-party data, and this is really the gold standard of consumer data in which all marketers, whether you're in B2B or B2C, it's critical for collecting data to be able to target, segment, do A/B testing, but more so to create net new content that's actually relevant, meaningful, and actionable to your audience. And then the last type of premium content that we sort of look at are experiences and events. So live events, whether they're in person or virtual, these provide a rare one-to-one interaction opportunity with your customers and your prospects. And when you combine interactive elements with these live events, it really does give you the opportunity to engage with your audience at scale and capture valuable data, and then use this information for follow-up and engagement cadences well beyond the event. So with that in mind, and with these 3 types of premium content, I'll just quickly go through 3 tips in terms of producing premium content. So the first tip here is know your audience, and this is more than just the 4 Ps. It's more about you have to know who influences them as well. So when you're creating any piece of content, you need to understand who the audience is and how they make a purchase decision. And this is important because it's not an isolated event. So this means that you need to understand your primary buyer persona, but you also really need to understand the buying center profiles as well. In the case, let's say, of B2B markets, this means your primary buyer persona could be a digital marketer, but she needs, let's say, IT and finance and probably legal to be involved in signing off on the deal. So in that case, creating useful action-driven content that resonates with each of these buyers is going to be a necessity. But the infographic that, let's say, engage the digital marketer isn't going to work with the head of security and IT for sign off. You know, this is where really understanding all of the different players in the buying center, their specific information needs, and also when they're engaging in that buying cycle is going to be really important. So this gets back to, before you look at any piece of content and making sort of premium content and repurposing existing content, really take a look at that asset and question and ask yourself, you know, who is this for? What information need does it serve? And does it hit those specific information requirements? So the next tip that I'll get into is, and something that kind of surprises me when I talk to some of my peers, is we know to take an inventory and we do audits of our existing content assets within marketing, but very rarely do we actually look beyond marketing to see the wealth of assets that are within sales, pre-sales, product teams, engineering, customer success, and services groups. So on the one hand, it can be a little bit scary, and it actually can make me shudder when I see that they're, you know, let's say using an out-of-date, you know, presentation template that's got an old logo or something on it. But the fact is that the information that they have in there is incredibly useful. It might need a bit of refreshing, but it's still relevant. And even better, it's actually been designed and created for an audience later on in the sales cycle, like in that mid to late stage funnel. Whereas marketing, again, being focused on that tofu and that top of funnel, going to these other groups and looking at and doing an inventory of what they have, whether that's in file shares, whether that's on their own drives, there's going to be a wealth of information and content that you can use and start to work with that. So, you know, and again, when I've done this, I'm either horrified at the look of what I'm seeing, but I'm delighted with the information that I can use. So one example being that I typically do is I will go to the product teams and I will ask them for either old technical white papers or scope, product or functionality scopes that they've written out in specs. And I will take a look at that to see if it's still actually up to date or if it needs refreshing. Frequently, it just needs a couple things updated and it's ready to go. And with that, we are starting to build out assets that I've done before that can be the foundation of either an infographic or an ebook that's going to support that. No one's going to be interested in that product spec, and it's probably a confidential document. At the same time, moving further upstream, it can be repurposed into something that's highly visual, perhaps is even part of a short snackable explainer video. There's a lot of ways you can start to use that. And so the more visual that you can make these things, and the more that you can take a look at the inventory of what exists around your organization, you're going to find that you have actually a lot of really great information that's already been used for that conversion mid and late funnel, and that it just is going to be really quick and easy for you to use and repurpose into something that's a bit more premium, meaning more visual, video, interactive, or more engaging from a live experience perspective. So the last tip here, and it's something that has been near and dear to our hearts here at ScribbleLive, is in collecting declared data. If you're impacted by either privacy, compliance, regulatory, such as GDPR, it's increasingly harder not just to get information and get data on our customers, but the information even that we look to purchase is often so flawed and outdated by the time we get it, it's really not useful. And so one of the things that we look at is the notion of now what's often called zero-party data, first-party data, or in this, what I've called declared data. And just to be clear about that, so this is the information that is explicitly given by a consumer or your prospect with consent. So it's obtained when you by asking the individual specific or direct questions, and that can be done through, you know, offline channels, through interviews or focus groups, or you can do it digitally through, let's say, web forms or interactive experiences. So regardless of how you collect this data, the fact is that it's really the gold standard for gleaning insights into your buyer's intent rather than relying on the perceived or inferred information that you're potentially purchasing from third parties. So what's notable here is that when you're collecting declared data, it really has the exponential value for creating and repurposing content that you can use then further downstream. So in our case, and I'll get into our example later, but in extending sort of top of funnel demand generation content, this not only were we able to do that, but then you have data that you're able to hand off to sales so that they can have more informed conversations with their customer. And that's really important if you consider that, again, customers are only reaching out 70% of their way already into their buying cycle. So when reaching out, again, just keep in mind that declared data or interactivity is a really excellent way of being able to do this, especially if you're in heavily regulated or if GDPR is a consideration for you. But also if you're finding that you're looking for a way to nurture your prospects mid-funnel, that this is a really, really great way to have information and data that you can repurpose into a lot of different types of assets. So with that, I've sort of hinted at our case study. And so we were looking at effectively ScribbleLive was going to our largest event and program and spend of the year. And so we were looking at, again, those top tips that I went through before. So how are we going to approach this? And so we looked at, we were going to add interactivity and really start to take a look at using interactive content and also at our largest event. And so you can see these stats here. The first stats from Demand Metric, and that 96% of participants, believe that interactivity impacts the buyer's decision. And so that's really helpful. That was really helpful for us in terms of gauging and diving a bit more into this, into the type of experience that we wanted to offer to our audience, and specifically at this show. The thing about going to the show is it's a great event. There's close to 4,000 prospective buyers under one roof. And what we find is it's much more of a top of funnel event. And so how are we going to be able to nurture, how are we going to be able to glean data and extract data from our audience top of funnel so that we would be able to repurpose it for mid and late funnel and better sales enablement? So in looking at our content strategy, what we sort of went back to the drawing board and we took a look at, okay, so how are we now going to take this all to market? And we knew that we were going to need what really was going to be a full circle experience. And so when we took a look at how we were going to approach this show, we knew that we needed to have a lot of net new content. And part of that being is that ScribbleLive went through a rebranding exercise in the earlier portions of this year. So that meant effectively all of our content and all of our printed material was outdated. And so we weren't about to go to the show and not have net new content. So once again, going back to the 3 tips that I talked about earlier on in the presentation, we're really focused in on who our audience is and also who the influencers are going to be. So in the case of this conference, while there's 4,000 attendees, we realized that most of these people were practitioners with probably about 30 to 35 at the executive level. So that really meant that we needed to understand and have 2 narratives, one for the practitioners and then one for that executive audience. And so that really helped us shape what assets we were going to repurpose, so that rather than just producing a whole bunch of stuff, we were really able to narrow in and zone in terms of the hard copy materials that we were going to produce. And so we ended up printing and going with product data sheets that were much more at a business solution level, and deciding that we weren't going to get into anything super technical, because this is, again, much more of a practitioner show, and with the executive audience, we didn't want to get too far down into the weeds, where we felt that was better served as a separate follow-on conversation, or even things that we could provide through our nurture and email drips post-conference. So, and again, looking at how are we going to collect data to better enable sales as part of this conference, we knew that we needed to do an interactive experience. And so at ScribbleLive, we're lucky to have an interactive content platform called Ion. And so we're no stranger to creating interactive experience that capture audience information and data. So luckily, we realized that we had actually, working with our creative services team, we took tip number 2, and that was going and seeing what exists around the organization. We went to our creative services group, who showed us that we actually have this interactive solution assessment. We were able to quickly refresh this and refresh it within hours, not days, of creating a net new data-driven and logic-based interactive experience. So we were able to produce this very quickly on a very quick turnaround, as well as get it to market, get it loaded on iPads, so that when we were at the conference, we were able then to hand it out, and we were able to scale ourselves at the conference, because if we were having these one-on-one conversations with each person as they came up to us at the booth, we would have been very limited. By having this interactive assessment, what it gave us is the scale that we didn't have with 3 people at a conference booth. The iPads gave us that scale that other people were filling in, were basically answering the questions that we were having in actual one-to-one conversations. And of course, we provided an incentive, which was very helpful. We had a pretty cool free Etch-a-Sketch. And so a lot of people were sort of drawn in because they wanted an Etch-a-Sketch, but at the same time, they still completed the interactive solution assessment. And in return, we actually received then hundreds of completed assessments. There were those that were incomplete, and that there were those that were actually completed. So we had, of let's say the 400 or so that were initiated, we had close to 300 of them that were actually completed. And so basically what ended up happening with this approach is that by the end of the second day of this conference, we'd blown away our targets with nearly these 300 completed assessments. And we did this again by repurposing and refreshing an older solution assessment, by taking a look specifically at how we could create a data-driven experience that appealed to the target audience, and really then provide us with information that we were going to be able to have a meaningful conversation with them after the fact. So moving on to how, when we have this data, here's an example of some of the reporting we were able to create and repurpose for mid-funnel engagement. So one of the questions we had asked was, what's their greatest content creation challenge? And so this result set here has actually been filtered for that executive audience. And whereas at the practitioner level, the results were pretty much 25% for every 4 of these categories. And what we found here is at the executive level is, if you look at producing content efficiently in the lower left-hand corner, that's at roughly 14%. Whereas on the right-hand side, the measuring content ROI is much higher at 33%. So right away, not surprising that executives would be interested in the ROI of content. It was actually very interesting to see that when we were at the practitioner level, that producing content efficiently was near and dear to their hearts. And quite frankly, probably why a lot of you are on this webinar, is figuring out how you can repurpose existing content, because that is an efficient way of taking net new assets to market. The purpose here with this, though, is when it came to our follow-up and having more relevant conversations, we knew then by looking at the title that here specifically were the things that were more important. So not only did our sales development reps and our business development reps not waste their time asking them these questions, they already had the answers. And so they could pick up the conversation like an actual live conversation where this digital dialogue had been left off. It also allowed us to produce some really interesting post-show assets, and I'll get more into that on the next slide here, which is what we look at when we sort of start to look at that full circle engagement strategy that goes from the top of funnel down to sort of the end of funnel, and again, repurposing content using that declared data each step of the way. So we started off at number 1 with this live event. Again, it was our biggest event of the year, and we knew that it was going to be a top of funnel, predominantly a top of funnel event for us. And we used it as an opportunity to collect and declare data through a repurposed and refreshed interactive experience that we basically handed out to people at the booth, and were able to get their responses. Once they completed this response, we had customized and personalized emails lined up that automatically sent to them upon completion of their assessment. And this meant that right away, and this is actually what sparked a lot of immediate conversations at the booth, is people looking at the result set that came up when they completed the assessment. Based on the results, it actually initiated several very interesting live conversations with our audience. And having a person at our booth who was there to schedule meetings, she actually scheduled meetings for the following week with our direct sales reps from the conference itself. So we completely accelerated that follow-up process. And I personally have never been at an event where so many meetings were scheduled actually at the event. And so we were able to leave the event with close to 15 scheduled meetings. And that those all took place the next week. We didn't have to wait till we came back, get the lists and upload those and come up with a drip campaign or anything like that. It was much more real time, much more accelerated. And we were leveraging the data and the repurposed content that we had produced through this interactive assessment. Interestingly, through the assessment as well, was one of the questions we asked is, what are some of the top forms of content that they're looking to produce? And it included everything from illustrations to videos to infographics to ebooks to white papers. And the number one thing that people were asking for, were interested in rather, were infographics. And so because of that, what we did is that we took a look at the results set and went, well, one, we know that that's of interest, so why don't we do a webinar on best practices in infographics? And so we were able to take that and make it that best practices webinar. We were able to produce that, and when we actually, and we were able to produce that with a lot of success and have actually a repurposed follow-up piece that we used to send to the attendees as well. With the result sets, we were able to produce blog posts, and in fact, the webinar that you're sitting in right now is also part of the repurposing of this content and declared data. Is that one of the responses was that people were very interested in how they could repurpose content, and one of their challenges as well that we heard in our engagement with people one-on-one at the booth was how they could reduce cost, go to market faster with content, producing it more efficiently. And here we go, is that repurposing your existing content is a great way to do that. So we accomplished a lot with just a single event and a single premium asset, that being our interactive asset. And when we got back from the show, once again, it all came down to simplifying and repurposing existing things. So one, we offered the assessment. In the follow-up emails, we included the assessment to their contacts, and we included a link so that they could share it with their peers. We also made sure that that data was pushed into our CRM system so that as a sales rep or a BDR was following up, they had access to the result sets. And so that made their conversations very relevant and very meaningful. Again, picking up the actual conversation where the digital dialogue had left off. And based on then their pain points, having then the opportunity to invite them and to further nurture their prospect, whether that was through the blog post that we did, whether that was through the first webinar that we did, potentially then even sharing this link to the recording of this webinar to help them with more tips that are relevant to the challenges and the declared data that they voluntarily gave us, that we're able to then create this full circle campaign that looks at top of funnel to mid to late funnel engagement. So Lauren, time for a poll.
Awesome, Corin. Great information here. We had a lot of questions come in about content data collection.
Yes.
So we'll probably get into that a little bit deeper into the,
Awesome.
the Q&A period as
Okay.
well. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch this poll right now. It's super cut and dry. So have you ever repurposed content before? A, yes, frequently. B, yes, I've done it once or twice. Or C, not yet. So if everyone attending can right now go ahead and vote, we have about 65% of you have voted thus far. We really try to get about 80%. So just take a couple seconds, look this over. Have you ever repurposed content before? Yes, frequently. Yes, once or twice. Or C, no, not yet. Okay, we're in 75%. So I'll give you a couple more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, closing the poll and sharing the results.
Ah,
So yeah, 41% yes, they frequently repurpose content. 38% yes, once or twice, and 21% no, not yet. Thinking about it, on the fence.
interesting. And Lauren, those results don't surprise me so much because of the fact that marketing is tasked much more than just with driving pipeline. There is that mid funnel and nurturing that is expected, and even more so, marketing tasked with sales enablement, marketing tasked with helping customer success teams with reducing churn. And so just that scope and on-demand need to produce and crank out content, again, the best and most effective or efficient, potentially the most efficient and cost-effective way of doing that is by repurposing existing stuff. Absolutely. Okay, so how can you repurpose your content? Here's some of the big things that we see from our clients who work with us with our visually on-demand talent network, as well as then with our Ion interactive platform, is that we see people taking those very copy-heavy white papers or old and outdated ebooks and turning those into much more visual or even interactive assets. One of the things we find with some of these longer white papers is that being able to break those down into chapters and using those as more of a drip and nurture approach. So rather than putting out this one big ebook, rather putting it out there chapter by chapter, week over week, which then can help you gauge your engagement better by seeing who's actually continuing along the path of either downloading it or sharing it or liking it, or some form of engagement metric that you're tracking. Again, videos, especially when it comes to anything that has any level of complexity, videos are fantastic. We find that, again, those white papers or technical specs, or even something that you want to give the traditional sort of sex and sizzle, we find that video animation is a great way to do that. Again, going back to how our brains are much more visual, and we tend to retain things much more when it's not just copy-based. We have seen that explainer videos and how-to videos are definitely sort of the leading types of content assets that get the best type of return and conversion. Infographics, time and time again, we're seeing that those are really great for, especially if you're doing some research in your market intelligence, or you've got some thought leadership pieces that you want to do. An infographic, even making it an interactive infographic, really is going to help you then again collect that declared data, but also understand what people were clicking on, what some of their preferences were. So then when you're arming your sales team for a follow-up, they've got the talking points and they're going to have a much more meaningful conversation. So kind of circling back then to gathering data and evaluating your content, some of the learnings that we had at this conference was, as I mentioned, we had close to, 500 people who engaged in the assessment. And part of, looking at where people dropped off, some people, at a conference when people are coming up to your booth and they've got limited time at a break, we saw people who basically dropped off once we handed them their Etch-a-Sketch. We saw other people who dropped off when they actually saw things that we could produce. They wanted to have an actual conversation. And then there was people that just really weren't interested in completing it. But we were able to take whatever reason it was that they didn't complete the assessment, we were able to glean and start to look at trends and things. So for example, if you have a multi-series ebook and you're finding that, let's say, the second chapter that you release is not getting that same amount of conversion or those touch points, is it the content? Is it something that's with the content, or is it maybe it's what's happening with that performance that it's gone down? It gives you the opportunity to create an A/B test to look at optimization. Evaluating your engagement points for future use. This gets into, are you seeing that you're getting more traction in, let's say, a specific industry or by a specific persona? Again, the practitioner versus the executive or some form of an influencer. And so learning from these metrics by looking and gleaning insights from the data is really important, and realizing that it's not, when it comes to data and interactive experiences and this type of premium content, it's not a, set it and forget it. It's something that it's a live and living piece, and that you're going to want to continuously evaluate and take a look at the results and seeing how you can optimize that. And again, that goes into continuously refreshing, whether that's on a quarterly basis or on a biannual basis, but definitely taking a look at that to continuously improve. And then the last point before we'll get into more of the Q&A is that being able to deliver relevant information to your sales team. And so looking at the ways that the repurposed content can also help with sales enablement. And so in our case, with this one experience from this one conference, while we were supporting our top of funnel engagement, we were able to create, as I showed you, several mid and later funnel assets. So for example, our reps were able to invite their prospects and clients to a webinar like this one. We've been able to create an interactive infographic of the results set that we added to our resource library. And that's, again, something that our sales reps are able to point their customers to, because we created that using our own technology in our ION interactive platform, and we're really proud of that. Likewise, sharing a Q&A or a blog post, we published out all of the results sets, and we found, some really interesting insights there. That again, it's those continuous and further downstream funnel type touch points that you can repurpose content while also facilitating better and more informed sales enablement. So with all that said, and I know I covered a lot of ground in the last 35 minutes, and so just to wrap up and summarize here, first off, it's not just about your buying center or your primary persona. It's really about understanding that buying center and the people who influence it. And that's not just a B2B thing, that's definitely in B2C. If you look at, the motivations behind how people purchase a car, it's rarely a single person decision. There's definitely some influences happening there. Again, taking inventory of your assets and beyond the walls of marketing, taking a look from your sales, your product, your pre-sales, your services organizations. They're sitting on a lot of content, whether it is ugly, it doesn't matter, because you're going to take that and you're going to refresh it, repurpose it into something really engaging and meaningful that you can use mid and further downstream for conversion. Collect data, declare data. Obviously, I've talked a lot about interactive experience in this, but again, we were able to effectively, from that one experience, we've been able to run and create about 7 or 8 different net new assets from that one data set that we produced from that conference. And that's really incredible, because it's not just for top of funnel engagement, but we're continuously building out this mid funnel content that's helping our sale, that we're able now to better support the buying process in that sort of 70% of the way that a person goes through a self-service buying model. And then the flip side being that we're providing our sales team with insights. So it's really important that your sales team has access to this information, so that they're, again, able to pick up the conversation when it needs and have that actionable, relevant, and meaningful conversation. And so, when it comes to repurposing content, the chances are that you have a lot of content existing in your organization. It's a matter of finding it. If you're able to incorporate some form of data experience into that and can transform those experiences and those assets into premium content, overall, you're going to find you're able to produce it at less cost, a lot more efficiently, and get it to market sooner. And so with that, I will turn it back over to you, Lauren.
Excellent. So first question that comes to mind is, can you please go over the Etch-a-Sketch and how the Etch-a-Sketch played a part in getting this consent data collection? Would you mind reviewing that, please? Because we had
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
Specifically about the Etch-a-Sketch.
Yes, exactly. So it's funny. So those Etch-a-Sketches are magic, I have to tell you. So we went to the show, and we are a fairly small vendor. We had a 10 by 10 booth, and we were surrounded by people with 20 by 20 and larger booths, with, you know, Starbucks and this and virtual reality things. And so we know that people walking by, we've got that nanosecond to get their attention and to draw them in. And because of our brand ScribbleLive and our sort of our campaign theme being from Scribble to Live, the Etch-a-Sketch was a great swag item for us to give away at the booth. And what it did is it succeeded in drawing the attention of people coming over to actually like pick it up and hold it and ask if they could have it. And at which point, absolutely, you can have this. You just need to fill in this assessment, as we handed them the iPad. And so it was that lure that was on brand for us, that drew in an audience in a very, very busy, crowded conference, that got their attention and was engaging enough that they agreed to actually fill in our interactive assessment.
Okay, amazing, interesting. So yeah, I'm sure an Etch-a-Sketch would catch my eye definitely if I was walking through an expo hall. And it's it's not that much of an increased cost at the end of the day. So
No, and it's vintage.
exactly, super vintage, super vintage. Um, so in collecting declared data or consent data, do you typically have to acquire a login or sign off from the individuals to be able to utilize that data?
So there is so we have up front within in collecting the data, it can't be your intention has to be explicit. So they have to understand that they are giving their information voluntarily, and that we're going to use this information. So it's given with consent, and it's that consent is given. Our intention has to be explicit. So, for example, it's also governed by our privacy policy and what we have published on our website. You know, we won't sell this information. However, in completing the assessment, and that there is the transaction of they're getting this Etch-a-Sketch and we're getting this data, and then it's governed by our privacy policy, that we will, and it was upfront and on the first page of the assessment, that we would be using this, that they are essentially giving us this data to use and repurpose for marketing purposes. But we would not give out or call out explicitly their name or anything personal to them. Excellent.
Thank you. And just for clarification of what an Etch-a-Sketch is, I have a couple of folks asking in here. Is it an app? No, it's a toy that you would utilize to draw pictures with what was it,
It's a
sand
kid's
or some
game.
kind of a powder? Yeah, but
Yeah.
you get to sketch and scribble on it.
Yes.
So being that it's familiar with ScribbleLive, it helps reinforce the brand name at the end of the day.
Exactly.
As well. Okay, moving on. You shared some examples of interactive content and ways to collect data using what would normally be just maybe a static piece of content or something like that. Besides the interactive solutions offered by Ion, which is under the ScribbleLive umbrella, what other ways can users make content interactive if they're planning to just test the waters, so to speak?
So that's a great question. You can start with, let's say, a basic web form. You know, you can start to take a look at very basic style on your web form. As someone fills it in, you could put something in there, a question at the bottom, for example, you know, with my content marketing hat on, you know, what is one of your top content creation challenges? Click one of the responses. You know, and build that directly into your web form. I believe Marketo offers that type of functionality, and so does Eloqua. So you're able to build that in using existing systems that you have.
Great, great. Yeah, I would say that for anyone that's currently, you know, a content developer, a content marketer, think of all content that you put out there as being at least on the fringes of being interactive. Because if your content at the end of the day doesn't have a way for the reader to interact with your company, right, then that content could be a loss. So I see a lot of content out there that It's great for SEO purposes, tends to rank. I'll read a blog post and I won't see a now that I'm done, what do I do next? And basically as a publisher or a content marketer, you already have someone on your site. Someone's already read through what you have to say. You know, in the world of SEO, sometimes we'll go generic with our content and not necessarily pitch oriented, but there are ways to, at the end, put in calls to actions subtly, or include a form, or have any questions, email us type thing, where you can collect that data and lead information of who's on your site, what they visited, maybe what other pages they visited, things along that nature. So you can integrate that into your sales or follow-up process. I know at SEJ, when people sign up for, well, when we have a piece of content on the site, we always have a call to action to sign up for a webinar. And not only does signing up for one of these webinars get you the ability to get great info, but you're also joining our list. You're getting in front of some of our partners, et cetera, et cetera. So if you think about that on the site side, if you don't have a call to action or some way to interact with your reader at the end of the day, it could be a lost opportunity on that front. So there's a lot of different options to get started, and then ways that you can make cool things like interactive infographics and stuff like that using solutions like Ion Interactive. Next question on what was the most popular form of content according to your survey of conference attendees. Do you have any tips on if an infographic has been put together, placed on a page, it's being marketed, do you have any tips on helping to get it to rank from an SEO perspective without using a lot of text on the page?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
That's the gold mine right there. I think there are so many infographics, and if we could get them all to rank, I think there'd be a lot of interesting things happening to algorithms. I don't know, Lauren, I think maybe you might be better off answering this one than I would, because definitely the big thing with infographics is that, it's about the graphics side and keeping, the information being visual and not having a lot of copy. Absolutely. So, you're getting into meta tag management and things like that. But again, going into the sources of traffic and links and things like that. But that's really a whole other strategy. And Lauren, you probably have a lot more to say on that than I do.
Yeah, I'll be short with it, but making sure you at least have an intro and a conclusion. So some text at the beginning of your page before the infographic and maybe afterwards is always a good thing. You can always do a part 2 or maybe an expandable piece of content that has a text breakdown of everything that's going on, so it doesn't necessarily take away from the user experience at the end of the day. And another thing I would suggest is, like Corin was saying, get links to it, right? So the more you can get links to an infographic, the better. There are some other workarounds like HTML5 and things like that, but I never really find that they seem to work as well as going visual or graphic first. So, but definitely look into what you can do on page from a text perspective, but definitely from an inbound link scenario as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also upload your infographic to visually, because then more people can find it
Yes,
and everything else too. Yeah. Could you go a little bit deeper into zero-party data and how it differs from first-party data?
Okay, so yes, it's something that, so we, especially for companies, for organizations, hit with the whole notion of GDPR, and I'm based in Canada, and our CAN-SPAM rules are a bit stricter than what is in the US. We've got an opt-in model versus an opt-out model. And so it becomes difficult to even reach out to an audience in many places. And so when you have the and so in terms of segmenting, typically you can purchase demographics and that type of stuff and lists from third-party suppliers. And so this information is that third-party data. And so when you're looking at whether you want to call it zero-party data or declared data or first-party data, this is information that you're collecting directly from that consumer or that contact, and they've given it to you with consent, but with the full understanding of the fact that they're giving you this information voluntarily for you to use, but within the bounds of your privacy policy. And so, it provides much more about intent and behavioral, because you're actually getting much more into preferences and behavioral type information versus things that typically are much more like demographics and title and location.
Excellent. Thank you for that run through. If we have any more questions on zero party data, that would be excellent. One question, how do you convince clients to take their PDF? Any tips on convincing clients to take their PDF guides from behind a submission form and then put it out there in the public in a way to get relevant traffic and links? So this is from Casey Yandel. Hey, Casey. So I'm taking that Casey's probably working with some B2B companies that really like to keep all of that information on PDFs. Very difficult for Google to properly index behind a lead gate or something like that, right? So any tips on convincing clients, especially on the traditional B2B or SaaS side of the wall, on the benefits of opening up those guides to the public at large?
Absolutely. Because the thing about, so when you gate that content, I just actually saw a stat yesterday. I can't remember who it came out from, but something like 80% of millennials will not fill out a form to get content. They will simply move on and go find the information that they want from somewhere else. So that's a really startling statistic. So there's that. There is this notion of this whole buying audience and very, very enormous shift in buyer behavior with millennials. And if they're not willing to do it, that's a very compelling reason to rethink how you gate or ungate your content. The other thing being is that, sure, you can put a gate on it and you get that information, and hopefully that information isn't like mickey@mouse.com, but rather it's great. They download this PDF. You have no idea what they've done with it. You have no idea if it's set on their desktop, if they've actually opened it, if they've actually, has it converted. You simply don't know. You have what I would call a vanity metric, which is a download. And so it's not really helpful. Whereas, kind of circling back to an answer that you gave earlier, Lauren, is that if you were to put this in front of a gate, and let's say even put a chapter or a few chapters of a PDF that's ungated, and then provide value and earn the right to have that gate that the person wants, then the rest of the information, because then you're going to see that conversion point. Then you're going to see that they're genuinely interested because the first chapter or two provided value, and that they want to get the rest of it. Because again, the challenge with PDFs and things behind a gate is that you've got no idea what they've done with it. And typically in PDFs, that link at the end, back to Lauren's comment about like, what is that next step? What is that thing you want them to do next? That's really hard to do when you have things behind a gate and then in a PDF that you don't know what's happened to it. And as well, putting links in that as a next step often doesn't work very well, and it certainly isn't mobile friendly. So, those are all things to consider.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, and something that I would add to that as well is that you touched upon, or the bulk of your presentation touched upon, was that people digest information in very different ways, right? Whether it's a blog post, whether it's a video, whether they really like to download a PDF and print it and sit on the couch at night, sipping a cocktail by the fire, reading the printed ebooks or PDFs. But point being is that there's different ways to, one, make sure that you're approaching the preferred way that everyone likes to learn. Like me, for example, I'm a visual learner. It's very difficult for me to sit down and read a business book. Sometimes audiobooks, I just don't pay attention. But if I sit down and I watch it within video form, I pretty much absorb everything. And
right.
I learned that early on, and I've used it my whole life. So like there's people that just prefer watching the video, watching the animation, whatever it may be, a good way for you to figure that out is also to survey your customer base. What kind of content do you like? How do you like to learn? Just a really nice personal question. Do you prefer video, audio? Do you prefer blog posts, ebooks, whatever it is? And get that information in the same way that Corin and the ScribbleLive team got that data at the event, right, from the attendees, and then repurpose that into other forms of content. You can do the same thing with your own customer base and get a better idea of how they like to learn. And that's the way you can prioritize your repurposing, because it's very difficult to go out and say, well, I'm going to do everything, right? I'm going to, not only going to have this in video and audio, but I'm going to have posters printed up and everything else. But if you can really learn about your customer base and then prioritize that way and expand accordingly, at least you know you're getting a much better ROI on your content repurposing
Yeah,
from day one.
absolutely.
Speaking of data collection and surveys, so we had some questions about, if they are putting together a survey, either to put some original content around that, have something that's proprietarily owned by the company, right, as opposed to sourcing third parties. What's the best way to go ahead and do that? Would you recommend that company would ping their own internal list, or are there any like third-party tools that you would recommend or utilize for gathering that data and information from the public at large?
Right. Yeah, and that's a great question, because I do feel that any means of gathering declared data is helpful for marketing efforts, and as you know, our experience showed us doing it ourselves. And there are tools out there. SurveyMonkey leaps to mind. I mean, they've got caveats in terms of how many respondents or how many questions and the scope of usage, but it's a very affordable tool to basically use and go out to your customers or solicit feedback from people. There are different types of online survey tools that are out there, some more robust than others. Or sending out your own survey. Even if you have customer advisory boards or focus groups and things like this. Lauren talked affectionately about printing out ebooks. Well, there are times that you can send out, depending on your industry, perhaps sending out an actual hard copy, printed evaluation with checkboxes. When you're working in healthcare and with retirement homes, that's often the best way that, they're not necessarily as savvy on their survey monkeys and emails and things like that, but the hard copy assessments and hard copy evaluations are going to be the best way for that audience to glean that information.
Awesome. Yeah, and the reason I speak about ebooks so affectionately was because when I first got started in this industry, Aaron Wall had a giant PDF called SEO Book that was later hosted on SEObook.com, and I would print it out and I'd go to Kinko's and get it signed and give it to employees as their homework for the first week would be to read it and come back with any questions.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Unfortunately, PDFs get outdated from time to time,
Yes.
but it worked at the time.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Is there any type of announcements or possible giveaway you'd like to give out there?
So unfortunately, I am not giving away Etcho Sketches. I have this feeling that Etcho Sketch is going to be trending on Twitter after this.
I know.
So what we are offering for the SEO webinar attendees today is that for those who are looking, especially with year end or planning and getting ready for January 2020, want to come out of the gates swinging, we are offering an opportunity to take existing content and repurpose that at a significant discount. And so for the first 25, we'll be sending out an email to follow up. We will include the link, we'll include the information. You can respond through that email. I believe we're offering it out to the first 25 people who respond. So if you want to get a jump on it, you can send us an email to getstarted@scribblelive.com. And effectively, we would like to work with you in our visually on-demand talent network in helping you reimagine an existing asset into something that is of premium quality. So much more visual, whether that's an infographic or turning something into an ebook or a white paper. We're happy to offer that for the first 25 respondents, and I believe it's up to a 25% discount, which is one of the largest discounts that we've had. So with that, and it is just for the attendees today. So for those of you who'd like to jump on that, you can send an email again to getstarted@scribblelive.com.
So we'll be taking that slide out when we,
Yes.
okay, awesome. All right, so those of you that are still on, please go ahead and take advantage of this. It's a pretty big deal and a great way to get started and explore the waters of content repurposing and visually as well. Again, thanks a lot, Corin. I really learned a lot today, and it's been great going through a live case study and getting some ideas on how to better repurpose our content.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us.
All right, great. So we're going to be sending out a recap to everyone just as a reminder with video, slides, et cetera, et cetera. Also, a blog post recap of today's webinar. If there's any questions that didn't get answered, we're going to go through them, and we'll be sending them over to Corin and her team to go ahead and get you some great answers and stuff like that. That will be available in the recap as well. And on that note, we're going to go ahead and sign off. However, once we shut things down, there's going to be a quick survey. If you could take like 30 seconds or so to fill things out, that'd be fantastic. They'll give us some great feedback on our presentations, and we'll make things even better than they are already. So again, Corin, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. And to our audience, thanks again.
Thanks.
Okay, have a good day.